Next topic is asset pipeline. So we are going to learn the concept of asset pipeline, and we are going to see how we can use asset pipeline in Rails application, and we'll learn the concept of pre-processing. And you are going to use asset pipeline differently depending on what environment you are running. Asset pipeline in development and asset pipeline in production could be functioning differently. Well, will be functioning differently. So we're going to actually see the differences. And then we are going to see asset helper method. What is and why asset pipeline? Asset pipeline has been introduced by what is called the Sprockets gem. So before Rails 3.1, asset pipeline feature was supported by third-party libraries such as JUnit and Sprockets. And from Rails 3.1, asset pipeline is now part of the Rails action pack, and in fact in Rails 4 it is actually through the Sprockets gem. So asset pipeline is actually part of the Rails framework. Okay, that's the key point. So Sprockets is the Ruby library for compiling and serving web assets. So when we say asset pipeline, basically we are talking about optimized scheme for serving assets. So by assets, I'm talking about JavaScript files and CSS files and images and things like that. Okay. So Sprockets as an asset pipeline gem, it features declarative dependency management for JavaScript and CSS assets. And it also provides powerful pre-processing pipeline that allows you to write assets in high-level languages such as CoffeeScript and SAS and CSS or less. Okay, so these are all high-level languages that you can use for creating JavaScript or CSS files. Okay. So asset pipeline feature is enabled by default in every Rails application. Okay. So in Rails 4, it automatically adds SAS Rails, Copy Rails, and Uglifier gems to your gem file, which are used by Sprockets for asset compression. So if you take a look at the, let me actually show you RP, and gonna just have any hello. You are going to see gem file, and here you see SAS Rails and the Uglifier and the Coffee Rails. So these are included by default for every Rails application, and we're going to talk about these things later on in a bit more detail. Okay, so what are the features that asset pipeline can support? So the first, concatenation of assets. So JavaScript and CSS assets are concatenated. So instead of multiple JavaScript files, you are going to download, meaning the client will download a single JavaScript file. Instead of multiple CSS assets, it will download a single CSS file. So that's the concatenation of assets. Minification or compression of assets. So size of the file could be smaller. And again, it provides ability to write these assets in other high-level languages such as CoffeeScript and SAS and ELB. So we're going to look into each of these in a bit more detail. Concatenation of assets. So basically concatenating all JavaScript files into one master JavaScript file, and also concatenating all CSS files into one master CSS file. So basically one single file for JavaScript and one single file for CSS file will be downloaded instead of multiple files. So it will reduce the number of requests the client, in this case our browser, must make to server in order to get these assets. Now, in production environment, Rails inserts MD5 fingerprint into the file name, and we are going to learn the concept of fingerprint later on in a bit more detail. And these MD5 fingerprinted files are cached by the browser and thus enhance the performance. Whenever file contents change, a different fingerprint will be generated, which will invalidate the cache, and the new file will be cached. Okay, so that is the concatenation, and that is the feature number 1. And feature number 2 is minification and compression of these assets. So CSS file, basically you can remove all white spaces and comments. Those things are not really bearing any functional differences. So it makes sense to remove white spaces and comments. JavaScript files might actually go through a bit more complex schemes to make it shorter, to make it smaller. For example, you might have it might have a scheme to change the long variable into smaller variable and things like that. Okay, so these schemes, there are in fact several ways. There are several, let's say, customization you can actually play around. But the goal is to reduce the size of the JavaScript files. Okay, and the third feature is again to be able to write these assets with high-level language such as CoffeeScript for JavaScript and Sass for CSS. Okay, so by using high-level language, you could actually generate this code a lot easier. So CoffeeScript is popular high-level language for generating JavaScript. It will be in fact processed by the preprocessor to generate the JavaScript. Sass to generate a CSS file. Okay, so supported language include as default Sass for CSS, CoffeeScript for JavaScript, and you could also have ELB file for both CSS and JavaScript. What that means is that you could embed Ruby code in your CSS and JavaScript code. Okay, so those Ruby code will be evaluated, and then end result will be in your CSS and JavaScript files. Okay, so those are the concepts of asset pipeline. Now let's see how we can use asset pipeline in Rails application. Okay, so there are 2 steps. Step number 1, you are going to use or change asset pipeline default settings in the manifest files. In general, you don't have to actually change these default settings because it should suffice most of your need. Okay, however, you might want to change for customization. And then if you need to, you can create your own custom assets and place them in proper locations of your Rails application. Okay, so let's take a look at the step number 1 first. Step number 1, basically you can use existing manifest files. Basically manifest files contain some settings for these assets. Okay, so by setting directives in manifest files, so here there are 2 manifest files that are created automatically, one for JavaScript and one for CSS. So the file that gets created automatically is for JavaScript is app assets JavaScript and application JS file. So if you take a look at Rails application, so let's actually start from here. On the assets, you can go to JavaScript, and JavaScript has this application.js file. So this is what is called the manifest file that actually provides asset pipeline setting for JavaScript. And we're going to actually talk about this in a bit more detail in the following slide. For style sheets, meaning for CSS, it does also have application.css manifest file. Again, here it has a default settings, and here this file might be something you might want to change. Okay, or you can just use existing settings. Okay. Again, we're going to talk about the actual settings in a few minutes. Okay, and then you might also want to change some configuration in relation to asset pipeline. Okay, so as I said before, different environment will use and serve assets differently. Okay, so the way that production environment serve assets is different from the way development environment is serving assets. So you might want to tune these settings in this environment specific configuration file. Okay, and Rails provide the default settings. So in general, as a developer, you really have a need. I should say, you rarely have a need to change them. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this manifest file, application.js for JavaScript and application.css file for CSS in a bit more detail. So let's talk about how these manifest files are used by Sprocket. So I'm talking about these manifest files, application.js and application.css. So let's see how these manifest files are being used by Sprocket Jam to support asset management. So Sprockets use these manifest files to determine which assets to include and serve. Okay, so these manifest files contain what is called the directive, and this directive is basically an instruction to tell Sprockets which files to require, meaning which files need to be included, okay, in order to build the CSS and JavaScript assets. Okay, as I said, these manifest files are application.js for JavaScript and application.css for CS styling. Okay, so with this directive, Sprockets perform the following. It will load the file specified. So basically, if we have seen this application.js in our previous the Ajax and JavaScript presentation. So it's specified. You can specify require jQuery. What that means is I need a jQuery library, and I need jQuery UJS library, I need TurboLinks library, and things like that. Okay, so the manifest file specifies the files that need to be included or loaded. Okay, so it will load the files as specified, and it will process them if necessary. Okay, so it will, if there is in fact the CoffeeScript file, then CoffeeScript will be converted into a JavaScript file and things like that. And then it will perform the concatenate them into a single file. So in fact, there are multiple. In this case, we have 3 JavaScript files, and those things will be concatenated into a single JavaScript file. And then it could actually compress them as well to make it smaller. Okay, so this is the role Sprockets performs based on information in the manifest file. Okay, so let's look into this application.js manifest file. This is for JavaScript. So this is the content. So if you take a look at the application.js file, this is the content. In fact, the only thing that is not there is this TurboLinks. Okay, so the require directive is used to tell Sprockets the files that you wish to require, meaning your application needs to have jQuery library and jQuery UJS library. Okay, now require tree dot, this is a dot which indicates the current directory. Okay, so require tree directive tells Sprockets to recursively include all JavaScript files in the specified directory into the output, meaning any JavaScript files in the current directory and below should be included. So that's what require tree is all about. Okay, so later on, in fact, we are going to create, well, we have an example where my student.js file is in fact included on here, right? The reason this is going to be included automatically is because we have this require tree dot, meaning any JavaScript file in the current directory where application.js is located, and all the subdirectories will be automatically included, meaning they will be loaded into the application. Okay. All right. So that is what require treat dot is all about. All files in the current directory and subdirectory will be loaded. Okay. Now this is the manifest file for styling CSS file. So this is basically again we have required tree, meaning all CSS files on the current directory and subdirectories will be loaded into the system. Okay, and require self means is that you can actually have a CSS definitions inside this application.css file, and those will be honored. Okay. Let's see. So how is everyone doing? So let's continue.